Hello, IELTS learners. This is David Wills with another episode of TED-IELTS. And today we just have a short episode, and I'm going to be showing you a question from the IELTS Writing Task 2, as well as my answer. We're going to talk through how to answer the question. We're going to look at structuring and all different parts of writing a successful IELTS Task 2 answer. First, before we begin today's lesson, I'd like to remind you that I have a book called Grammar for IELTS Writing. If you go to my website, which I'll link below, you can get a free copy. This is a PDF that you can read on your computer. If you want a physical copy, a paper copy, you can find it on Amazon. All right, let's begin. So here's our question. Some people claim that not enough of the waste from homes is recycled. They say that the only way to increase recycling is for governments to make it a legal requirement. To what extent do you think laws are needed to make people recycle more of their waste? So let's take a look at this question. What do you think you have to do? When you first look at this question, what is the first idea that pops into your head? What is the topic, in other words? Are there any keywords or micro keywords that help you understand it? Some of the important words are the word recycled, of course, government. We can see recycling is used again here, and the word waste. Now, another word that's important is home here, and we're looking at the idea of the waste from home together. So not just any waste. So what kind of question is this? Is this related to the environment, or is it a society question? Well, because of the introduction of the government and the idea of laws in the next sentence, it's clearly a society question rather than environment. Nowhere in this question does it ask you to discuss the impact of waste on the environment. There's an assumption here that recycling is a good thing, which of course I'm sure most of us agree that it is, and we're being asked essentially how to get more people recycling. So we think about the key facts in this question now. We already mentioned we need to talk about the waste from homes. We need to think about increasing recycling and what the government can do for us. So this is a to what extent do you think kind of question. And then here we have that laws are needed to make people recycle more of their waste. So we're going to be discussing that. So you would want to be looking at ideas regarding, are laws strictly necessary, or can people be trusted to recycle without laws? And we're not talking about industry, and we're not talking about the sorts of trash people encounter when they're out and about. Specifically, we're talking about the waste from homes. So before we begin writing our essay, we need to think about some important things. We need to think about, some synonyms, because we don't want to repeat the words from the question too much. So we've got this phrase that I've mentioned several times now, the waste from homes. Well, waste could be said as trash, as rubbish, or you could talk about it in terms of pollution. You could also change the form from waste from homes into household waste. There's not really much we could say instead of recycling, although you could possibly change that to reusing. Then we need to think about structure. How can we structure our essay? and you should have a plan before you begin. Now, I've written my sample essay, which I'll show you in a minute, and I have annotated it so you can see my structure more clearly. But I always recommend to my students that they write a 4-paragraph essay. This is because it is the most simple way to write an essay. You have your introduction and your conclusion, and in the middle you have 2 body paragraphs. Some teachers suggest 3 body paragraphs, and that's fine. It is a little more difficult. Perhaps if you're aiming to get a 7, 8, 9, that is effective, although you could easily get a 7, 8, or 9 with a 4-paragraph structure as well. In any case, you're going to want to have the 2 body paragraphs with clear focus. For me, I'm going to look at the counter arguments to my belief first and then disprove them. So when I look at this question, to what extent do you think laws are needed? I think they are needed. I completely agree with that. So I'm going to first look at the opposing view, why laws aren't needed. I'm going to argue against that, and then I'm going to state my arguments for the necessary laws. Let's look at my sample answer. So we can see my essay here. We're going to look at it sentence by sentence, and you can see that I have highlighted each sentence with a label on the right side of the screen that states the point of my sentence. So here is my introduction. My introduction is comprised of 3 sentences, and I think most IELTS Writing Task 2 essays should have a 3-sentence introduction. You want to begin with a general statement. That means a very broad statement that covers the whole issue. Nothing specific. It should be big enough to capture a reader's interest. And here I've said, pollution remains a significant problem all around the world, and this is causing people to debate solutions. So you can see here the word pollution. This is introducing the topic, which is, household waste, but I haven't specifically talked about that. We're just looking at the bigger issue right now. I've got a sentence that can actually be used or adapted to a great many kinds of IELTS Writing Task 2 essays, and that is, remains a significant problem all around the world, and this is causing people to debate possible solutions. So you can use this, you can take it and adapt it to different essays. Next, you're going to want to refine your general statement, so to give more specific details. So in this case, I start off talking about pollution, but of course we know that it's not all pollution. We're just talking about waste from homes. So here I say, one such solution is for governments to impose laws requiring citizens to recycle certain kinds of waste from their homes. So that's quite simple, and you can see here I've basically paraphrased the question. Finally, I come to the third and final sentence of my introduction, and this is a statement of intent, or as you might want to say, an outline of the essay. And here I use a phrase that I actually use in many of the model essays I write. And that is very simple, very basic, and it can be adapted pretty much to any IELTS Writing Task 2 essay. This essay will argue that. Then you follow with your thesis. That means your idea, your position. I do this because it's a little more formal, more academic than saying, I think that, or in my opinion. Generally, we try to avoid using personal pronouns in this type of essay. So I say environmental laws are essential to reducing waste and thereby saving the planet. So here in the question we mentioned laws and government. I introduced the phrase environmental laws. So then we come to our body paragraphs. We'll start by looking at this first body paragraph. Now, to be honest, this is a little longer than you really need to write for IELTS, but I thought I would use this as a demonstration of a slightly complex structure that looks like this. So I would state the counterpoint, that is to say the argument against me. Then I would give a little more information to support it. So kind of like refining a statement. Then I would refute it. That means to disagree with it. So the counterpoint states, the case against laws imposing mandatory recycling revolve around the notion that people can learn to recycle themselves. So here I've come upon this phrase, mandatory recycling. So mandatory means you have to do something. And I concede that this is true to an extent. I go on to give a little more detail. With the improvement of education, people typically litter less and recycle more. But then I want to argue in favor of my idea, which is that we do need these laws. However, our planet is presently in the grips of environmental catastrophe, and it would take several generations for people to make changes to their lives. So here's a good phrase, in the grips of environmental catastrophe. So this is showing that things are very bad in the world in terms of pollution. I'm going to give a second counterpoint and then refute that as well. Now, the reason for this is it just shows a complexity of thought and language. It shows that I'm not just sticking to one idea and expressing my idea, but I'm showing that I can look at both sides of the issue and come to a more considered conclusion. So it is also sometimes argued that poor people cannot afford to make the sacrifice necessary to use less plastic and switch to sustainable products, and it is therefore unfair to punish them. So you can see the introduction of some good language, use less plastic, sustainable products. So we're talking about the environment here, we're talking about the issue of pollution, and I can refute this, again that means disagree. However, mandatory recycling would not require people to immediately give up plastics. Instead, they would simply be required to dispose of them in an ethical manner at a government-run recycling facility. So I'm giving some depth to the idea of what this government system of laws might entail. I'm also using a complex sentence here. You can see the idea of the semicolon or conjunctive adverb followed by a comma. This is a great sentence type to use in the IELTS writing exam. Then we come to the paragraph where I'm stating my idea, and you can see it's comprised of 4 sentences. So I introduce my main argument, I state my main argument, I explain my main argument, and then I give a concrete example of it. So this is a great way to structure an argument for several of the kinds of IELTS Writing Task 2 essays. So I introduce my main argument. The case in favor of laws mandating recycling is simple and irrefutable. So this just acts as an introduction. You'll notice the spelling mistake here. Whoops, what happened there? Okay, so it's suggesting I spell this F-A-V-O-R. I'm from the UK, so I spell things with the British English, but for some reason my laptop has switched to the American English, and it's telling me this is a mistake. You can use English, British or American English in the IELTS writing exam. Both are acceptable. So then I state my main argument. These laws would ensure that a far higher amount of household waste is recycled, thereby reducing the amount of pollution that goes into our environment. So I've very clearly and eloquently stated my argument here. And I've used this phrase, this word, thereby, to show the consequence, the positive consequence of these laws. That's not enough though, I need a better explanation, so I state more. People cannot be trusted to do this for themselves, and the evidence exists in the places where environmental laws are strictly enforced compared to those where they are non-existent or weakly enforced. So this brings about an idea, but it's not good enough just to give that idea. You need to give an example to prove it. Now, in a proper research essay, you're going to be citing facts, but in the IELTS exam, you can just state examples that you think or you remember. You're not really being tested on your knowledge here, just your English. Anyway, I'm from the UK. I live in China, so I know this to be very true, unfortunately. In the United Kingdom, people are required to recycle most of their household waste, and the environment is far cleaner than in other countries such as China, where people can, that should say throw, not through, where people can throw any trash away without consequences. Finally, we come to the conclusion. Now, a good conclusion should refer back to the introduction and also very briefly and not specifically to the body paragraphs. Some people think they have to write a lot for a conclusion, but just 2 sentences is okay. So first, you're going to restate your thesis. That means your opinion. So this means going back to the introduction and summarizing what you said there, but in different words. And you can then briefly revisit the body paragraph ideas. That's a good way to do it. Let's look at this. Let's look at what I've written. So in conclusion, laws are absolutely essential to ensuring that people recycle their household waste. So that is the main idea of my essay. That is what I stated up here. This sentence. So my statement of intent. This essay will argue that environmental laws are essential to reducing waste and thereby saving the planet, matches up perfectly with, in conclusion, laws are absolutely essential to ensuring that people recycle their household waste. Finally, I come to my last sentence, which just clarifies this and repeats my main ideas. Without such laws, very few people would actually go to the trouble of recycling. However, if governments enforce these laws, almost everyone would have to comply. So you can see here this idea, very few people would actually go to the trouble of recycling. This matches up with this paragraph, the first body paragraph. And then my next idea, if governments enforce these laws, this matches up with the second body paragraph here. So this sentence is referring back to my body paragraphs. Notice the use of this sentence type again, the semicolon, conjunctive adverb, and comma splitting these 2 clauses. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out my grammar book. You can find a free copy at my website. All right, I hope you found this episode useful. Let me know in the comment section what you want me to make videos on in future. I'm going to continue trying to make 2 episodes of this show per week. You can follow me. Don't forget to give this video a like if it's been helpful. And thanks for watching. I'll see you again this weekend.